I was so determined to never share this story. I don't want the backlash, and I'm sure nobody will believe me, but I can't keep it to myself anymore. My life has been a miserable existence for the past 12 years, and I'm ready to share why. You can tell by the title that 12 years ago, I made the shitty decision to cheat on my lovely wife, Kristen. She's perfect in every way, and under normal circumstances, this idea wouldn't have ever crossed my mind. But 12 years ago, we lost a child, our 5-year-old daughter, Amara. I loved her with every fiber of my being. She was radiant, funny, and taken far too soon. A drunk driver did it, and the rage almost drove me to insanity. I went to therapy for the anger and eventually forgave him. Always miss my little girl. For the first couple months after her death, nothing in my life felt normal. Least of all my relationship with my wife. There was almost no conversation, no laughter, and zero intimacy. Once me and Kristen had worked through the initial grief, I thought her sex drive might return, but to no avail. Anytime I tried to get her going or lead her into anything more than a makeout session, she would pull away and put everything to a halt. Obviously, I never wanted to make her do anything she doesn't want to, but I had my needs and was determined to get them met. Enter Vicky. Sexy, young, fierce, and untouched by the tragedy of child loss. I know I was in the wrong and an asshole, but please just listen. I started meeting Vicky after work every other day to hook up. At first it was purely sexual satisfaction, but eventually it became something more. I would tell her things. She would listen with such earnest eyes. I could feel her heartbeat, and it would all just spill out of me. I always had the suspicion that Kristen knew about my affair. Our marriage had become loveless, and after 2 years, I stopped feeling the guilt. Texts between me and my wife still said I love you, and I still got her flowers on her birthday, but all emotion towards Kristen had died. Vicky was all I cared about now. Everything I used to do with Kristen, I now did with her. I was enjoying life again and had everything I could ever want until 2 days ago. After 12 years of pulling of this affair with no repercussions, I truly didn't think anything bad could come of it. Vicky doesn't want marriage, and my wife had never spoken of divorce. So when I came home a couple days ago, I didn't expect to see Kristen sitting in our living room, sobbing. "What's wrong, dear?" I asked a mundane response, but after a long day of work, it was the only one I had energy to give. Kristen jumped slightly, like she didn't realize I'd come home, and when she looked up at me, I was surprised. She was smiling. "Kristen?" There was a question in my voice, although I wasn't sure what exactly it was I was asking. She wiped her tears and stood to embrace me. "Welcome home from work, my love. Are you hungry?" I made supper. Kristen had never made me a meal in the history of our marriage, even before the affair, even before Amara died. Sure, I didn't know how to handle this version of my wife. She was almost loving, hopeful. She moved around the kitchen with a purpose and gave me loving glances. I almost left purely from the discomfort of her love. I was so cold and unused to this affection from her that it was unsettling. After an interesting dinner, we went up to our bedroom. I turned out my lamp and started to see Elle scroll on my phone when Kristen turned on the bathroom light. I didn't pay attention to her, as she always showers before bed. "Mark!" I looked up and was shocked. The shower was on and steaming, and Kristen was there, in lingerie. I wasn't sure exactly how I should react, but it didn't take her much coaxing. Who was I to argue? The next morning, there was a note on my desk. "Have a good day at work, honey, at the salon. I love you, smiley face." I wasn't sure what to make of the note, so I threw it away before going to the bathroom to shave and get ready. When I walked through the bathroom door, though, I froze. Sitting on the sink was Amara's old hairbrush. A huge jumble of emotions rapidly coursed through my body, but overwhelmingly, I felt confused. One, because Amara was dead, although it isn't completely out there to say Kristen put that brush there. But two, we threw out all of Amara's old things. The memories were too painful. I hadn't seen this brush in years, and seeing it now was so startling that I could only throw it in the trash. I wanted to text Kristen about it, but couldn't bring myself to. I didn't want to drag up old memories if it wasn't necessary. Trudging down the stairs after I got ready, I went to put on my shoes when the floorboards creaked behind me. Hello? I called, but no one answered. I chalked it up to paranoia and continued to grab my coat. As I shut the front door, though, I could have sworn I heard a quiet giggle. After my unsettling experience at home, I was eager to get to work, but unfortunately work that day was uninteresting, and I was bored out of my mind the whole time. All I wanted to do was see Vicky, but after texting her to hang out, she said she had a meeting at her office. I was upset, but found solace in the fact that I would get to see her tomorrow. I walked through the door earlier than usual, since Vicky was busy, and was immediately met by Kristen. She put her hand to her heart, and her eyes shined with happy tears. It worked. Her voice was brighter than on our wedding day, and I had no idea what to make of it. What worked? I wasn't sure it would, but now that it has, I can tell you, come here. Kristen grabbed my hand and started to drag me towards the kitchen. My mind was racing. What could she want? She hasn't been so excited about anything in ages. My mind raced as we reached the dining room, and Kristen halted me before I could walk in. She was trembling, and her smile was so wide, I thought her face might split in half. Did you see Vicky today? My heart plummeted. I always had suspected she knew of my affair, but hearing her say it so bluntly when we'd never discussed it before threw me for a loop. And no, I stuttered, but her smile didn't break. If anything, it got wider. I'm the reason why, Kristen said, on her voice. What do you mean? You started seeing her because of me. I stopped wanting you after Amara died. Her death killed our relationship, killed your love for me. It made me realize that the only way you'd love me is with her. With Amara, Kristen's eyes were crazed and my heart began to pound. So I brought her back. My heart was racing now, beating harder than ever before in my life. My breath was bated, and I suddenly felt the difference in the house. It was dead, quiet apart from my breathing. Cold air flowed from the dining room to where we stood, and I pushed Kristen aside to walk closer. Rounding the corner, I prayed to every god, any god that my wife was crazy. But I entered the room, and my daughter was sitting at the table. My whole body went numb. I was shaking. It couldn't be her. But deep down I could feel it. It was her. Kristen had gone off the deep end. When she had said Amara was back, I expected a ghost, something supernatural. But what Amara was, it was worse. The stench of death floated from where her bones sat. They were tied together with string, and I could see hot glue sloppily dripping down some parts of where the bones connected. Half of her jaw had disconnected and was hanging from her face. She was propped up by various objects, giving the illusion of sitting. Kristen, I choked. What have you done? I felt her hand on my shoulder and jumped as she whispered to me. I brought our daughter back. Her grave was trapping her, but I saved her. I was shaking my head, fear and adrenaline clouding my thoughts. But the brush, creaky floors, and the giggle I dashed. Oh, that was just me preparing your surprise. Kristen giggled, actually, and it sounded just like the one I heard before work. Kristen was insane. She dug up our daughter's bones. God knows how she got the brush back. She might have just bought it, but I wouldn't put digging through a landfill past her. I collapsed to the floor and suddenly realized Kristen had left. The soulless eyes of our dead daughter's skull seemed to bore into me. Amara? I choked, but there was no sound. I wanted to leave, to get out of this awful place. This wasn't real life. It couldn't be. I must be going insane. Was it enough? Will you stop seeing Vicky? Kristen had appeared again from the kitchen. She was holding a butcher knife. I loved Vicky and would never stop seeing her, But I wasn't about to tell this psycho that. Of course, darling. I forced myself to stand on shaky legs, plastering a false smile on my face. I love you so much. You did so good bringing her back. Kristen looked relieved and put the knife on the table. She went in for a hug, and I made a split-second decision. As my arms wrapped around her, I grabbed the knife and plunged it into her back. I heard her gasp, and she pushed away from me. I could see the betrayal in her eyes, the hurt. It didn't last long, though. I don't know where I hit, but it must have been important, because within a minute, she was dead. I could feel myself getting numb as I looked at Kristen. She had a single tear running down her face, and her eyes were empty. She looked innocent. I felt an intense stab of guilt. I did this to her. I cheated on and hated her because of Amar's death. She didn't deserve that. For the first time in a long time, I remembered the Kristen from before. Kind, sweet, gentle, and overall, a wonderful wife. She was my everything. What had I done? I'll make it up to you, I whispered. I dragged my wife's body up the stairs and laid her in our bed. Kissing her on the cheek, I smiled at her. You can rest now, honey. I went back downstairs to grab my daughter, and humming a tune, I laid her in bed next to my wife. My perfect family. I smiled and gave each of them a kiss on the cheek before laying down beside them. In the morning, I got up and went to work. I pushed through the day, just wanted to see my wife again. But once I was finished, I went to see Vicky. I'd been cheating on my wife with her for 12 years, and I'm terrified to stop. I'd seen what lengths broken-hearted women will go to get the one they love back, and I couldn't risk it. After Vicky was satisfied, I finally got to go home. My real home. The smell inside was rancid, death choking every hallway. But it was worth it to have my family again. I approached Kristen and Amara and grinned, my heart feeling more full than ever before. Honey, I'm home. Although she couldn't respond, I knew she'd heard me, and I could have sworn that for a moment, I could see the love shining in her cold, dead eyes.